Okay, we are back here with at the Utility Emergency Response Podcast, and we've got really two great guests that we've been trying to get on for some time now, me and Jim, and we're very happy to have them on. We got Kevin Morley from the American Water Works Association. He's in charge of federal relations over at the American Water Works Association, and we also have Cris Pérez, who's the director of technology at Santa Clarita Valley Water. So we're very happy to have them on. We're going to talk about two major topics. We may go off a little bit on to off topic, but biggest topics we're going to talk about are the AWIA update, and then later cyber for water utilities. So cyber protections and the CISA update. So if without further ado, I want to hand over the show to Kevin, and Jim will also be kind of co-hosting as well, asking questions as well. So Kevin, why don't you go ahead and take over?
All right, so AWIA is America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018 that amended the Safe Drinking Water Act, specifically Section 1433. So going forward, I will refer to 1433, not AWIA, just because it's 7 years on, and when EPA, as I'm sure you guys will want to talk about, when EPA comes and does an inspection of Chris's utility or some other utility, right? It's going to be a 1433 inspection. So that's what it is. That's where we're at. So at the point what we're at right now in the year, the large utilities, those that serve over 100,000, ideally have certified to EPA that they've completed their risk and resilience assessment, which, amongst other things, obligates the utility to assess threats from malevolent acts and natural hazards, which would include things like cybersecurity, since we're about to walk into Cybersecurity Awareness Month as I'm looking at Chris's background. Very, very apropos.
Yeah.
Um, and then here, as of tomorrow, those utilities should be certifying to EPA no later than tomorrow that they have completed any revisions that are appropriate to their emergency response plan. And the thing that's really important, and hopefully it's not too late for those systems, but in that process, and looking ahead to the other systems that have to do this, you're supposed to take the findings from the risk and resilience assessment and use that to inform your emergency response plan. In other words, what vulnerabilities were revealed, right? Now, when we say ERP in the context of the statute, it's a little bit broader than what we traditionally think of as your kind of tactical emergency response plan, which is fine. Don't get hung up on that. But the important thing is that in that provision, Congress made it very clear that the utility is expected to act, right? Because in
Mhm.
that ERP provision, not only do you take into consideration the things that were in or the findings of the RA, but you're in that very first sentence, it says that the utility shall, and in statute means you will.
Mhm.
In other words, you're expected to act, is what I'm saying, to enhance the resilience of both the physical and cybersecurity of the system. Now, it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say you have to do this, that, or the other thing. It doesn't have 8-foot fence or you have to have MFA by next week or something like that. But you're expected to take action on the things that you identified. And then there's a number of other elements that we can unpack, talk about all day long, but that's the essence of it. And then looking ahead, right, the medium systems, those that serve 50 to just under 100,000 or 99,999 water systems on the wall, have to certify their RA by December 31st. And then in June of 26, they have to do the certification of the ERP, and then the final bracket, which are the smallest systems, are 3,300 to 49,999. Have to do the RA by June 30th of 2026, and then December 30th, 2026 for the ERP. Little bit of strategery here. Filing your RA early, there is zero advantage, right? Because the way the law is structured, is that it's 6 months after the RA certified is when you have to have the ERP. So technically, if I submitted, if I was a big system and submitted my risk and resilience assessment ERP or to EPA on March 1, by law, 6 months to the day would be September 1. I'm not saying that EPA is going to enforce that directly. I'm not saying that they're not going to enforce that. But the closer to those actual deadlines you are, that's what you should do. So everybody should file tomorrow and just crater the EPA network. See what happens. See how cyber resilient they are. Anyway, so those are kind of some big boundary areas, Isaac, that I would just kind of throw out there to start with, and we can go into the details as you or Jim or Chris see fit.
Yeah, a couple items for you, Kevin. One is the ERP is really kind of the key from the standpoint of you don't want to do that one early. The risk and resiliency, I mean, the risk and resiliency, you don't want to do that one early. But the ERP, you could update that and be early. It's not going to affect you at all.
No. I'm all I'm saying is you can get the work done
Yeah.
early. What I'm saying is that your data certification for the RA is a trigger. So filing that early with EPA is of limited value to none, right? Mm-hmm. So let's just say a large system, let's just say a system right now that's a medium that's due in December. Let's say they just finished the working with Chris or somebody else right now. Okay, you're done. Start working on your ERP. Don't file that RA until maybe you want to take off New Year's Eve, but get it in there in the portal right about December 30, 31. Because what they're going to look at for an inspection, there's a couple of things that they look at. One is presence absence. Can you physically show me your plan? I have it or I don't. The next one is, did it come in on time? Right. Mm-hmm. So as long as you're before these dates, you're going to be good. Right.
Yeah.
And then they're going to look at, did you include the things you're supposed to include? And that's usually when it comes to the inspections, the problems that we see is that entities aren't including something. Let's say, a lot of your listeners are probably out there in California, right? A lot of retail systems are, they're purchasing water, right, off a wholesaler, like a larger utility. So they don't have their own source water per se. So no, they don't really include that in the risk and resilience assessment. Well, if it's not applicable, so to speak, then just say it's not applicable and why. Oh, well, we purchase water from Chris and, he deals with the source water. We're just a purchaser, right? Yeah. Or, we don't have chemicals because we don't have to do, Chris sends me enough chlorinated water, right? Meets the specs and we're good. So we don't have to do any booster stuff. So we don't have any treatment, right? So I wouldn't have chemicals. We'll just say that, right? Don't give them a reason to ding you for what is essentially a paperwork issue. Mm-hmm. Those are the kind of things that have been observed. And then there's, some cybersecurity things that they're saying too.
And I guess that's, kind of leading into what are you seeing from, you're nationwide. So, from utilities that have had the inspections, what are you seeing? Is there something common, or is it just, hey, it depends EPA region to EPA region and inspector to inspector, what they're going to look at, what you're going to get?
Yeah, there has been some variability, and we've had some very what I call some very productive conversations with EPA over the last 5-6 months to try to kind of level set on that and make sure that if Jim's coming to see Kevin, he's given the same kind of oversight and instruction as when he goes to see Chris, right, or mm-hmm. Isaac or whoever, right. And there are some nuances, right? Everybody's kind of does carry their own cultural bias to the issues, but first and foremost is that presence absence kind of stuff. And then let's say you're in California right now, right? 'Cause I assume that's where a lot of your folks listen, right? Wildfires, been a lot of wildfires,
Yeah.
right? And if wildfire is not in your plan, right, they're probably gonna say, hey, how come you're not thinking about wildfire, right? Like, why is that not a threat that you're thinking about as a utility? Or if we got a potential hurricane coming up the eastern seaboard here, and you're in South Carolina, and you got nothing about flooding, and especially after like the year we had last year with Helene. Like, hey, how come flooding is not in your plan? Just at all, right? Maybe you can say, hey, man, we're 300 feet above flood grade or whatever, the 500-year flood, so it's not an issue. Fine, great. Just say that, right? Just document it, right? Some of those things are articulated in the statute, right? There is a definition of natural hazard, and some of the bigs are in there, like earthquake and flood and wildfire and hurricanes, stuff like that. So yeah, I think part of it, Jim, in our conversations with EPA, it's been very clear that a lot of times it's like the things in the risk assessment that are specified in statute just weren't there. Like, again, if you're a retail system buying water, I don't have an intake, right? I got a turnout somewhere. So that should probably be an important asset that I document and what that is. But, just document it, even if it doesn't apply. So that, because the inspector doesn't know that, right? There's hundreds of water systems. And then I think there's some other nuances on the cyber front, right? They have a checklist that the checklist items in them themselves aren't specified in statute, so they're not necessarily violations, but they may be identified as areas of concern, like, hey, Chris, hey, you're not doing multi-factor, or you have no data backup that we can tell, and based on this conversation of these 15 questions, right? So those are the kind of things that they've been flagging, Jim, that I'm hearing from around the land.
Do we expect, I know historically, we all have privacy agencies that are kind of, made in charge of kind of following through these types of regulations. The Safe Drinking Water Act is followed through in California by our Division of Drinking Water. Will they incorporate kind of those inspections for like a kind of lack of additional resources or an opportunity for efficiencies to have your division of drinking water engineers include that as part of their sanitary survey?
So there's two parts to that question. One, Section 1433 is not delegatable to the states, period. It is a direct federal implementation. There are some states that have, under their own legal parameters, done things in this realm, right? There's a couple of states back east here, New York, Maryland, Connecticut, and a few others that have legislated specific cybersecurity requirements on systems, completely independent of the feds, right? When EPA does do an inspection, right, they're obligated to notify the primacy agency. A lot of times the primacy agency may come along on that, or at least they know that you're being inspected, but they're not the ones doing the inspection. So that doesn't mean that they have no role here. I'm just saying under 1433, for an enforcement purposes and compliance, right, they're the primacy agency is not the doer. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, just more of a conversation. Okay, no, I know at a more of a at the more local level. I work at the regional level. I'm working within the state, and historically, kind of coming from once upon a time, I was a chief operator of a water system, and it was more of like a cooperative relationship we had with our division of drinking water, and before that there were the health department, and kind of, again, I think having these conversations, historically in water utilities we've been focused on physical risks. We're all super aware of what to do when pipeline breaks and earthquakes, etc. And this realm of cybersecurity, it's been kind of a challenge. I don't think a lot of folks have the deep enough bench, the specialization, the that particular the area of expertise to really kind of understand what the conversations are supposed to have. You know, we get this
Yeah.
checklist of things that we got to evaluate and look at, but overall, they don't mean as much as they do to like a larger organization that has a whole, you know, they have a SOC and they have a, you know, a whole bench of experts
Right.
on a particular topic.
Right. Yeah. You know, I mean, we just overhauled our whole cybersecurity package of resources, and one of the things that we developed was this getting started guide that focuses on what I call the first mile, or some of the most basic things. And
Mhm.
one of them that's probably of greatest value, to your point, is an incident response plan. And I was saying this years and years ago when we were getting all wrapped up around the axle about whether or not somebody's going to contaminate the water supply. Right. And it's like, well, there's all kinds of things to do detection and sampling. And Jim and I have talked about that many, many times over the years. But ultimately, the question is, if it happens or when it happens, independent of how you figure out it happens or what sensors you have, what are you going to do? How does the system react? Right. So
Mhm.
it's taking what you would normally think of under your traditional thinking of an emergency response plan and applying it to the cyber realm. So if my server or whatever goes down and gets ransoms or something, how do I disconnect from the internet? Can I disconnect it? What does manual operations look like? Is it possible? Doesn't mean it has to be, but what are my conditions, right? And if that's the case and I need manpower,
Mhm.
right? Am I part of CalWarn so I can bring in other operators to help me kind of monitor key points in my system, right? So just understanding what your operational cadence is going to be under certain conditions is part of this process, right? It's that concept of an all hazard approach.
Yeah, real quick with that, what are you seeing with EPA, how deep they're going? I mean, you know, like we're just talking about here, yeah, you've looked at cyber or any other type of disaster event. You've got some text in there, but do you have really a viable plan or checklist or something connected to that that says, yeah, I got hit. Here's what I'm going to do about it. Are they going down into that level, or are they staying more at the kind of the surface?
I would think of it. I would be less focused on what EPA is doing and more focused on what is necessary for you as a utility, right? Because you've done two things when you've done the when you've fulfilled your 1433 obligations, right? And
Hmm.
everything we're talking about here is applicable to systems that are below 3,300, 100% applicable to wastewater systems. It's just not that there's not a compliance element to it, right? And that is continuity service, right? Your mission as a utility ultimately is continuity service. So what are you doing to sustain that? Because now you've certified to the EPA that you've done your due diligence to evaluate reasonable risks to your system, right? And that you have an emergency response plan that accounts for those reasonable threats to your system. And so this is forget about EPA. This is a public relations thing. If you've said that, and then it turns out you didn't really mean it, right? That's problematic, right? That's a public trust confidence issue. In some cases, it could become a legal liability, right? But and then ultimately, if EPA gets involved, it's just like, well, gee, Jim, you said you did this, but you really didn't. So
No,
there's
I mean,
potential problem there.
I fully agree. But I mean, in my involvement with Warren
Well,
and others, I
yeah.
mean, you see that there are those utilities that are looking to check the box.
Mhm.
Well, but you have that across the board on any rule, right? I
Sure.
mean, there's a speed limit too. I don't
Mhm.
always well, the speed limit. I'm going to go public. Right? but I would ask Chris. There's a financial dimension here that's really important too, right? Yeah. Is that your insurance underwriters and the rating agencies, especially for the larger systems, they're looking at how you're managing risk, right? And are you doing your due diligence? So the marketplace is adjusting a little bit, and I'm sure, Chris, you can probably attest to some of the constraints or the shrinking of cyber coverage for a system. For every dollar, right, I'm getting less coverage, right? And to get bigger coverage, I'm going to have to commit more and assure them that I'm doing certain things to get that kind of coverage.
Yeah, yet another list of check boxes.
I know. I'm just,
when you're applying for cybersecurity coverage, same thing. There's a level of a box checking that you have to do, and again, once something does hit the fan, then there's always going to be an opportunity for that that insurance coverage to be voided because you check the box and you technically don't have that within your.
Well, it just happened. It just happened up in it was not a water utility. It was more the city of Hamilton, Ontario.
Uh-huh.
18 plus $million because they hadn't implemented MFA.
Oh no!
And that was a condition of their insurance. And so I'm not really sure who the underwriter was. We're like, well, hey, you basically defaulted on your policy, so we're not taking a hit on this because they've been taken to lunch on ransomware for the last 8-9 years. Yeah. I mean, it's $1 trillion plus business, ransomware alone.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of blocking and tackling that a utility can do, and that's the purpose of some of our resources from CISA, the technical assistance from EPA, and that. Coming back to your question about EPA, they've sort of been leaning into the cyber question a little bit, not so much from a enforcement perspective, but from a technical assistance perspective. Obviously, if there's some really gross, obvious negligence and just nothing happening, that might lead to a different kind of conversation, right? But that's not kind of what we're really seeing.
Yeah, Chris, I think, wasn't it last year, 2024, that you helped organize an EPA cybersecurity exercise?
Yeah, it was last year around this time, specifically in honor of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We did collaborate with the EPA, putting on a tabletop exercise. The challenge being, it's again, we're focusing on small to mid-sized water agencies, water and wastewater. So we partnered up with our buddies in wastewater as well.
Yeah.
But the challenge being, again, back to what I was sharing, depending on the size of your organization and the maturity, you don't have those deep benches of technical expertise. You might have an IT guy, but the IT guy is not necessarily a cybersecurity trained person, and that IT guy may or may not help with the OT environment. I've heard horror stories in regards to some of my colleagues in small organizations saying that they had an incident last year, and there was a big disconnect between their IT folks and their OT folks. They weren't speaking the same language, and they just pointed fingers. I thought they took care of that. Oh, I thought they took care of that. So,
right.
So that's
and that's that. If you look at the 1433 requirements, right, from the perspective of not so much, well, this is the thing I got to send into EPA, but how can I use this to make my organization better in ensuring that I can have continuity service, right?
Yeah.
In theory, right, you should work those kind of things out. Like, well, if this happens, I mean, there's a plethora of incidents to game this off of, right? And I'm sure you did some of those in your tabletop, but I mean, we had a small water utility in Texas have its elevated storage tank taken over by Russian actors and overflowed the tank. That's a really different kind of animal than what we had traditionally seen up until last year. I mean, they could have gone beyond that. You had the Iranians target multiple Unitronics devices after the Hamas attack in Israel, right? And in October 2 years ago, and they basically had control of some of these systems. All they did is defacement, but they could have done more, and that's slightly terrifying, right? So you don't want to be that utility, right? So
No, you don't.
there's a lot of things that you can do. Like our new getting started guide is very much oriented towards some really basic fundamentals that don't take a lot of, they're not resource intensive, right? With a couple of exceptions maybe. But I mean, implementing MFA is not a super heavy lift. Now it changes, and Chris, I appreciate your insight. Like,
Yeah.
If you're an autonomous system, right, that's one thing, right? You control your universe. But if you're part of a local municipal government, right? Well, I got to call Isaac down at City Hall IT, and
Yeah.
he's got 1,000 other things he's trying to do. He's not really worried about setting up MFA for the water utility. But you can come back to, I've got this statutory obligation. I know that this is a risk. Here are the best practices from AWA, CISA, EPA. Everybody's telling me I should be doing this, right? So, what is it going to take to make it happen? Right? Take some time to go through that stuff.
That was the idea behind putting together these workshops. I know Jim mentioned earlier that again we put together a tabletop with EPA, and we had a good attendance. We had more attendance than some of the other topics. I think people are when they talk tabletop, people get nervous that I'm going to need a lot of technical horsepower to kind of get through one. But once you attend, you kind of see that it's just basic questions, kind of common sense, logical. If this situation, what do you do? A lot of us are familiar and experienced with physical exercises because when we build a water tank, we know every single person in the whole organization knows you need to put a fence around it because you don't want people coming up to it and tagging it. We need some type of alert system so someone's not opening doors in facilities. So that's all kind of really inbred into all of us that we are aware of those those risks and challenges. I think when we start bringing in the idea of this, cybersecurity, and our SCADA and control systems weren't designed to fight off hackers. They were designed to turn on and turn off to move water around town. And now it's a new realm for a lot of us. A lot of our operators aren't not necessarily versed until we go through a scenario and experience some catastrophic failure in some foreign countries taking over our water tank. Then we're all cognizant when we start designing systems. Until then, we're all it's all theoretical, and it's all not something tangible like a physical fence or barbed wire or alarm system on a door.
Yeah, real quick, a couple items there. One, just for those listening, Kevin will get the link for the guidebook and get that into the show notes. And then Chris, the work that you're doing and we'll discuss a little bit more, but things go, all the events that you've got going into Cyber Awareness Month this month, we want to get those in as well. But the one thing that I want to add to what you were talking about really is that when you have, if you want to call the response and risk and resiliency and the response plans, it's your kind of your playbook, especially the response plan. You can have a mediocre playbook and you're exercising, and you're much better off than having a phenomenal playbook and never exercised it. And
it's all about muscle memory.
it, I push it. It's in all of my presentations, but hey, an emergency response plan of any type without exercise is nothing more than a doorstop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tabletop is great, but functional or, getting staff out there. So for instance, Chris, I don't know if you've done that yet, but, having a utility that says, hey, our SCADA system's down. We're having to run the system manually. Doing just a tabletop exercise on that to understand the difficulty that says, wow, you know what? We better do a little bit more planning because we are going to need a warm to come in and bring some staff in, or something like OTS, the operator technical services, where you can get a bunch of operators to actually work the system manually, because that's the only way you may be able to run the thing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jim, I think I would say that there's a lot of duality in some of the exercises you guys probably do out there for earthquakes with a cyber incident, right? I mean, just take away the cause, right? Like the impact on the system and not having visibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's just a major power loss, right? And so it's there's a lot of different ways that simulate. I said the same thing about Winter Storm Uri down in Texas, right? It that could have just as easily been a large scale cyber incident, right?
Yeah.
The issue is a bunch of systems didn't have control of their system. It happened to be because of an ice storm. But so there's a lot of kind of, you know, the consequence aspect is what you really need to focus on and not really the why so much. Just what is the consequence that's unacceptable? How do I manage for that? Right. And there's a lot of different things that can make that consequence happen.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, if I understand how to manage out of that consequence, I can mitigate a whole lot of different threat vectors. Maybe, not always, right? That have, instead of having this really kind of linear kind of, well, I got to do this for cyber and I got to do this for, you know, P2 or whatever your power out. What's the P3, P2? PSPS thing.
Yeah.
Or an earthquake, right? I mean, there's a lot of your solution set is going to be fairly common, but working through that is ideally the beauty of this process and understanding and learning about your system. And you know, I think that's what's most important. And again, I can't stress. One of the things that we also created was just a basic template for an incident response plan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who is the insurance underwriter? Like, who do I call at the State Fusion Center? Like have that someplace so that, you know, whether it's long or short, depending on the complexity of the system, like I know where I'm going next.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the biggest thing out of these. When you do any ever after action of live events, the benefit has been we've walked through it and people know the responsibilities. I'll never forget MWRA out in the, you know, Massachusetts, Boston region, right? They had a really huge main break. I don't know, it's probably a good 15 plus years ago. It was like a 96-inch, huge conveyance line. And it blew out. And in the after action, the staff involved said, you know, we had actually done a scenario like this in our training, our tabletop. And so there was, you know, the details were different, but we understood the mechanics of the steps that we needed to go through and we're able to adapt. Still stressful, but not as stressful as never having kind of ridden that bike and finding your balance point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, question on that. I mean, I think I point more to Cris on this one. When you look at now with so many organizations going to this whole document retention strategy and so forth and blowing documents out, it was a battle that I had in my previous was saying, no, 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 exercises and responses, those are forever documents because they can be used over and over again, especially like what you're saying, Kevin, is
Yeah.
if you were to take a look at that utility right now, there's a good chance they had 100% turnover or even more of staff. And so if they don't have any of that material, they are blind to whatever they learned in the past.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
And
that's a good point.
I think part of that too is as you already got all aware of the I guess the preaching of the silver tsunami that's happening now on loss of institutional knowledge. I mean, there's been a lot of folks I've been seeing, a lot of services being offered. I'm seeing that trying to help digitize and using document management systems and modifying retention policies to kind of keep hold of data longer for the purposes of that institutional knowledge and documenting it in your systems. I wanted to, and it's a slight little pivot here, but I wanted to showcase and share this flyer we prepared for October Cybersecurity Awareness Month.
Yeah, and we'll get that posted, to the various social media sites too, as we get this all put together.
So I'm sharing now. It's visible there. This is a flyer we put together. And again, it's a collaboration of various associations, as you can imagine, trying to really expand our reach to all the nooks and crannies of specifically California. But our friends at Water Isaac just last week shared that they'll be sharing this flyer and these signups nationally. So this will be going everywhere. But we're only providing contact hours for folks out of California. So my relationship with the Division of Drinking Water is only California for contact hours related to cybersecurity. So again, this is a continuation of the success we had last year. Last year, we had about 200 water or wastewater organizations represented. We took them through a series of workshops on the basics of cybersecurity for SCADA. We did a threat briefing. We did a tabletop exercise with, as we mentioned earlier, with the EPA cyber team. And it was a very successful event, so much so that we got invited to talk and share and communicate at other forums. I believe we attended, I spoke at the Southern California Cybersecurity Symposium hosted by CISA and the FBI, which was great. And the focus there was communication. I think that was the big thing. And again, helping our friends at the federal level understand the challenges we have at the smaller level. We're not all giant entities with again, like I mentioned earlier, deep benches of resources and levels of sophistication in regards to like a dedicated person doing this job or that job. So that was very important for them to understand that, and that we have to kind of take that massive amounts of data that they offer, all those resources they slap on their mega websites that someone has to kind of churn through that and understand what the heck they're reading, and then understand how to turn that into action. And that was the challenge. So the idea here with this series of workshops was to kind of take that information and hone it and communicate it to a level for our small to mid-sized water and wastewater organizations. So as you can see, we have various partners that we've teamed up with for getting the word out to the various associations, folks and water organizations out there. We have the PWAG, which is about 21 smaller water organizations down in Southern California. Rural California, which rural and Cal Rural, which are all the smaller water organizations throughout California that don't have the deep resources to get a lot of help and sophistication. And we have AWIA, the ACWA, CWEA, which are our wastewater friends. Of course, Water Isaac, our national collaborator there, along with California JPIA. That's the cooperative Joint Powers Authority for water insurance in California, and of course California Nevada, the section of the AWA. Myself, I'm the current chair of new technology at the California Nevada section of the AWA, and I've been working with Alex. I believe she's like the co-chair of the emergency management committee. So we've been collaborating, communicating to get that information out there. Beginning of the month, we're hosting Cal CISIC. That's under the Cal OES group, and they'll be providing us a cybersecurity threat landscape, kind of an overview of what's going on in California and what we should be worried about in regards to cybersecurity. Then following up the following week, we're doing a SCADA workshop similar to what we did last year. We have a partner from Cal Water Isaac conducting kind of a basics of cybersecurity for SCADA. A really good, well-attended session we had last year. We're having it again this year. Then moving on to week 3, our friends at FBI and InfraGard. I was just talking with them last week, and we were kind of honing in on their Cybersecurity 101 workshop again, because a lot of our attendees and a lot of the folks in the industry are not, again, they're not IT folks, they're not specifically OT folks, but they're administrators, they're contract administrators, they're general managers, they're board secretaries, etc. So that this Cybersecurity 101 is going to be a great service to getting everyone from all levels aware of what they need to be focused and worried about. Then lastly, we're closing out the month with an update on the PRC threat update. Just recently, I had an opportunity to meet with our regional director. I was just sharing that with Jim earlier that we had a visit from our regional director from CISA just last week, and we were talking about the challenges that are impacting not just our organization, kind of the industry as a whole. And we had a great conversation, and they're really kind of focused. The one question we're asking, what keeps you up at night? And the one thing that keeps up a lot folks up at night is the PRC threat, and we'll have an update on that provided by CISA at the end of October.
Yeah, Chris, can you elaborate, like from the standpoint of PRC, for those that aren't real data people, what that stands for and how that works?
Sure, I'll share the bare minimum because you'll need to attend to find out the details. But the PRC is the People's Republic of China. So
Gotcha.
we're worried about a whole nation of a whole nation of challengers. So that's been something that's been on the radar for a while. Again, not to kind of cross
Mhm.
over any lines of information I'm not supposed to be sharing publicly, but if you attend a lot of the monthly briefings from the different federal agencies, you realize that there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of focus right now on water, wastewater, our critical infrastructure.
Hey, Kevin, real quick. Well, one thing I don't know if you still hear it a bit, Kevin, or maybe even Chris, if you're talking to any of the smaller utilities, one of the things you'd hear in the past, or I've actually heard it not too long ago. I'm a small utility. They're not going to, I'm
No.
not an impact that they're going to want to go after. And I just tell them, yeah, but on the internet, all they're looking for is IP addresses, and every utility looks the same size on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. My response to that is get over yourself. It's not about you. Right.
Good, good.
And I mean, I'm saying that a little flip, but the reality is that they are seeking this is about national security
Yeah.
and the ability to impede force projection by the United States, right? That is
Mhm.
why there have been incidents in Guam and Hawaii, right? There are, and certainly in California, there are locations that you can not, with a lot of imagination, understand their connectivity to our ability to force project for mitigating threats in the Pacific from China.
Mhm.
And that applies to other utilities all around the country, right? They service somebody else, right? It's about the service we provide to others, and it's that interdependency. And so, and to think that they're only going after one system is a bit dubious, right? They're not. They're looking for everybody, and so um, that's the narrative. And I'm sure the session Chris has had will shed a lot more light on it than I can really do here justice. But they are looking to get in to multiple infrastructure systems.
Mhm. Yeah, Isaac.
Yeah, I had a question for Kevin. I really like when you talk about like real incidents and how water utilities affected. Do you have any like incidents that we can learn from for like smaller water utilities? Like, hey, look, this does happen to water utilities. Do you have any incidents you can talk
Sure. How much more time you got in this session here? There's a couple that just come off that aren't even, and Chris can back me up on this hopefully, right? The majority of the things that have happened are not sophisticated, man. I mean, we're literally running with our shoes untied and scissors in our hand. We need to stop doing that, right? Take your stuff off the internet, implement MFA, and a lot of this stuff goes away, right? Make them be more sophisticated. Some of it has been sophisticated, but a lot of it hasn't been. And I'll take the case of is it a fellow by the name of Wyatt out in small little utility, I think it's Ellsworth County water system in Kansas, right? For whatever reason, he left the job, whether he got fired or left on his own accord is here nor there. But he left, and then I don't know, a couple months later, literally out having beers with the boys, and he's like, "Hey, Isaac, hey Jim, Chris, check out what I can do." And he shut the water system down from his
Yeah,
phone
yeah.
because they didn't take his credentials away. I mean, that's a simple HR protocol I mean, technically it's cyber, but I don't, it's not a cyber incident. It's a bad HR policy, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And or you have contract. I mean, you had a situation out there up in I think Discovery Bay where there was a contractor that was disgruntled over a situation, and again his credentials or her credentials hadn't been revoked, and they were able to go back and manipulate the system, right? I mean, or you have open open protocols operate on these systems. I mean, the Oldsmar incident down in Florida that really, you know, put the water sector up to the front of the glass, right?
Mhm.
I subsequently had more White House level meetings than I've had in 30 years, right? Because the water sector was suddenly this bad actor. I mean, that was basically, they had no passwords, they had no MFA, they had open, not very well segmented system. It turns out it wasn't a nation state actor, or at least that's what the FBI is saying. But the point is, you know, there was manipulation of a chemical feed that could have public health consequences, right? You've had, the biggest incident in the water sector was back in 2000 down in Australia. Again, Marucci Shire, right? Disgruntled skate operator contractor basically opened the valve, so to speak, and released millions of gallons of raw sewage that
Wow.
caused millions of dollars of damage.
Jeez.
So, I mean, these are really simple things, right? That are
Yeah.
consequences that are mitigatable, right? It just takes the time to think through the possible, recognize that it is happening, and what you can do to manage that risk to your system, because insurance ain't going to cover it, right? I tried to explain this to my boys when they started to drive. I said, look, I have health insurance, or I mean, I have car insurance rather, but that doesn't stop the deer from jumping in front of the car. You still got to drive smart, right? That just means I've got a way to pay for it. Well, now insurance isn't necessarily going to pay for it because you're not driving smart, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the best analogy, but
Yeah.
something to think about.
Real kind of follow up to that, Kevin, of those incidents that you just talked about, um, are any or how many are post AWIA that it should have been something they addressed in their RRA and their ERP?
Good question. Yeah, that's a good question.
I think everything but Marucci was post AWIA that I've mentioned,
Hmm.
Yeah.
right? So the first one was in 2020. So everything I talked about was all post 2020.
So again, that's the difference between a utility taking it serious and just checking the box. I did it,
Yeah.
and how well did I do it?
Yeah. I mean, I always come back to the insurance kinks is that, once the CFO gets involved, sometimes it seems like things happen because now it's going to cost me money. It's not just this nagging thing that I got to submit to the EPA, right? So
Mhm.
one is it foreseeable? Absolutely. Right. I mean, to say that I didn't think I would happen because I was a small system that's out the door.
Yeah.
Then the question is, well, can you demonstrate due diligence, right? Doesn't mean you have to stop the deer from hitting the car, but have you taken appropriate actions to mitigate that possibility, right? Driving with the lights on, being a cautious driver, blah, blah, blah. I.e., MFA, take yourself off the internet. So if you haven't done those things, the insurance company will be like, well, hey man, you didn't do your job, right? I'm not here just to eat it because of bad decision making, right? And what I always say to the utilities in particular, our resources are very much designed to support decision support type things. Like, here are the things that are most appropriate for us to do. And then you have to make a risk management decision at the utility is, instead of you taking that on as the operator, make your city council or board make that decision,
Hmm.
right? Hey, look, we went through this assessment based on this guidance, all of our stuff's based on this framework. maps into the EPA little checklist. It maps into the CISA CPGs. Hey, we're doing pretty good. We've gotten 60% of the way, but Chris, boss, and to get to 100% of the basics, right? We could probably do that in X months for X amount of dollars. Now you're not talking techno speak. It's based on industry best practices. This is what it takes to get us to a reasonable baseline level of security. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
And then they can budget for it. Now you're talking money, and that's how the decision makers think, right? They're not talking about, Cisco this or, ping sweep that. They don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus, hey, we got to replace, a mile of, 8-inch ductal or whatever on Main Street. Well, that's an easy connect, right?
Easy connect.
This other thing's not. So that's my counsel.
Kevin, what Chris has put together looks like a pretty good program. Do you think some of the national, I know one of them is definitely California focused, but do you think the kind of the national WARN network would like to get that flyer and take advantage of it?
Yeah, we can get that sent out to everybody.
Okay. So Chris,
we're doing
that.
We're doing some we don't have some of the programming, but I know EPA, there's going to be a lot of promotional activity happening, advancing different things during Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So I think flooding the zone is a good idea.
Okay. All right. I know we got just a little bit of time left, and Kevin, you and I have both been a part of the kind of the update of the M19. Anything in there that is of value with what we've been talking about, or just in general that listeners would get some value?
Yeah, I come back to I think there's a little bit more discussion on the value of advanced planning and exercising, and some discussions on mitigation. Some things have been shifted around and reorganized a little bit, but I think your point's just generally speaking, and that's one of our older manuals in this subject area, right? That goes all the way back to, I think it started in late 60s as in response to river catching on fire. Right. That was some of the nature of like, hey, we got to think about how to do source water protection and emergency planning for stuff. So way before EPA even existed. So understanding the possible and what's reasonable, right, has been the nature of our business for a long time. And I think it's really, I think the exercises that, you talked about and Chris just did, I think are exceptional and just building capacity within an organization and within the community to stay in front of changing threats.
Yeah, and Chris, I think I'd like to have you expand a little bit. Really what you've done in this area with the partnerships with the various associations, which used to be very siloed.
Yeah.
They all had their own kind of program, and really especially on the cyber side here, to bring that all together so that they are working together. I think that's been a huge benefit for the water sector, both potable and wastewater.
Yeah, to Kevin's point, that was what kind of that was the rallying concept, was all the folks that we're seeing in the news and all these wastewater organizations that were getting compromised. They were all small to mid-sized water organizations.
Yes.
They're not Miami Water or New York Water or LADWP. They were small to mid-sized water organizations, and that was the rally right there. That's where we need to come together because of that. We don't want to be on the news. We want to keep, the starting point was we want to keep California out of the news. That was the starting point. And what do we need to do that? And we need to help all our small to mid-sized water organizations and demystify some of the materials. Again, like I was mentioning earlier, that you get pointed by a CISA representative to a massive website with a tremendous amount of resources, but you don't know where to start. And then as a water operator, you wear a tons of hats. Number one, you got to keep the water flowing for that day. Number two, you got to make sure all the billing's going out. And number three, you got to shut down people who aren't paying their water bills. So number four is now starting to take some time to navigate all these other rules that we got to follow that we we need to figure out and make happen. So that was the idea. And I think when we communicated that to all the different association partners, they understood, and it's a good fight. It's not there's no one getting extra publicity or selling services. It's all just information share, and that's the whole idea. It's sharing information with their colleagues.
Yeah, I think the partnership point is really important here, right? I mean, we've been had an accessible collaboration with CISA over the years in this issue. I mean, our guidance was first issued in 2014, directly in parallel with NIST and the development of the NIST cybersecurity framework. So it's all origin from that. And then in terms of CISA, right, as you go through our materials and go through the getting started guide, which is really basic, and then you get under the hood, so to speak, and do the assessment with our tool, right? The output from that tool, if you're brave enough, you can take that output and import it into one of the CISA projects called the CSAT tool, which has even more advanced capabilities, right? So you basically go from 11 basic controls to 28 with our small system assessment to 100 with a full NIST assessment, right? And then if you import into the CSAT tool, now you're going up to about 200 different controls. So, I mean, we're trying to span the range of maturity so that we can engage everybody where they are, right? The important thing is that you're getting on the highway, the cybersecurity journey, and building your capacity. Everybody wants to be here, right? Nobody starts at the top of Mount Everest, right? That's what I tell my scouts when I was doing that stuff, right? Nobody starts at the top. You can start at base camp and move your way up. So start somewhere, wherever you are, and move on that way. And, there's a number of different really cool resources from CISA, like their vulnerability scanning and other things that, you can get there. But to Chris's point, it can be overwhelming. So pick a spot and go down that road and just begin somewhere.
And is that what the guide meant to be? Does that kind of gives you that roadmap for that journey?
Yeah, I think the way that we repackaged, we broke it into 3 phases, Jim, right? So phase 1 is the getting started guide. And what we did is we broke down, like, why is MFA important? What is my desired end state? And what are the tools that I can use to do that, right? So for a really small system, you could use a program like Duo from Cisco. It's super, doesn't have everything, but it gives you that basic MFA functionality to authenticate that Jim is Jim and he's supposed to be here, right? There's more, but it's fairly inexpensive, right? These are not like, millions of dollars. And I think that's the intuitive kind of distancing from this issue from small, medium systems. There's a presumption of it's going to be really expensive and really complicated. And, there is some of that, but it's not. A lot of the policy stuff is, hey, take Jim credentials away when he's gone, right? That's not that's a policy that doesn't cost money.
I mean, if I'm a small utility and I'm working with my IT provider because I'm farming that out, is everything that you're talking about something that if they're decent, if they're good,
if they're decent, they should be
a
practice, right? Like
heavy lift for
I need to do this, right? I went through this review. I need to know that this is happening. I want you to verify that you're doing this for me, right? It allows you to have that conversation.
Right.
Right. And when you get into a bigger system, when you do the vulnerability assessment, it's like, Chris is a really smart guy, but he's not going to keep 100 controls mind mapped in his head, right? This is a way to document where you're at and where you might need to plan and have a little bit of forecasting in your capital plan of, well, we can't do it all right now. but here's what we're going to do next year and maybe a little bit after that. But let's have a strategic approach, right?
Right.
Like we do for the other traditional assets of the water utility.
I'm looking at it as, if it's in enough layman speak that if again I'm not the technology guy, I'm the chief operator or the general manager or whatever it is for the mid-sized to small utility, being able to take that, understand it, and then go to my IT provider and say, can you do this? And if they scratch their head and go, wow, you're talking about a, a big, big lift. Okay, maybe it's time to put an RFP out for somebody new.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the getting started guide, and I'll defer to Chris's opinion. I'm not asking him to comment on that, but that's what that was written for, is that kind of initial kind of, break the log jam and just get some like, oh yeah, we could do that, right? Like, but then, I will say once you get into the assessment tool, there are some points there that are going to take some technical acumen, right?
Sure.
As I argue with somebody, I can only simplify the Pythagorean theorem so far, right? And at some point, you just have to learn the Pythagorean theorem, right? It doesn't get
Yeah.
simpler. May not make sense still, but
Yeah.
that it is what it is. But
Yeah.
there are people that are supporting these utilities that installed this stuff,
Right.
right? That in theory should understand this stuff. So
Yes.
it helps you have a more kind of, I think, it adds some transparency to the engagement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And knowing what you're asking for and having a way to verify that you're getting what you want.
Mm-hmm. Real
I
quick,
think I
was
wanted to add one more thing,
Norman
Jim.
involved in any of those projects? I know she did some great work when she was with EPA for us on power resilience and PSPS, and just wondering if some of her talents were incorporated into some of those tools.
Not directly. She wasn't. Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Chris, you had
Jim, I
something?
just wanted to add it. There's one other component to all this, and in the world we live in today, is that convergence of both IT and OT environments. It's happening very fast, and
Mm.
the last 10 years has been like it's been 15 20 years ago. Everyone is excited about the ability to let's plug our SCADA system into the internet so I can turn something on and off from my phone. Everyone's excited, but no one put the energy in to the complexity of protecting that and making it safe so that you could do that. We just plugged it into the internet, and now we're playing catch up now to going
Mm-hmm.
backwards to fix everything to make it safe. But even more so in the last handful of years, since probably in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a tremendous hyperdrive in regards to like the convergence of both IT environments, which traditional business and OT. So now these consultants that a lot of folks have, these IT managed services contractors, a lot of small organizations have, they don't have you can't fault them for not having the wherewithal of an OT environment because they've never had to deal with an OT environment. But our expectation is that they should be aware of the OT environment because it's the same kind of stuff. It's the same switches and network types of configurations that are similar. But there's some nuance that's lost in that jump over in that environment. So I think that's some of the challenges as well. Is we're going through a learning curve,
Mm-hmm.
what they call it, an inventory of our systems, and newer people with different focuses are starting to kind of put their hands and get involved into our traditional operationally driven OT environments.
And to kind of look at that as just the entrepreneurial side is, if I'm one of those IT providers and if I don't know the OT side, if I want to focus on the water community, especially that small to mid-size, that's some understanding that I better either learn because I'm going to lose clients, or I'm learning and I'm gaining clients. The
Correct.
one other item to hit real quick, because it is like the big thing, is the AI. And Chris, I
Mm-hmm.
know one of the last conferences. I think you had a big AI session, but
Yep.
what are you seeing? And Kevin, maybe you can follow up, but AI has been huge and valuable, and it's very valuable in certain aspects to do research. But it's kind of like the internet. It was seen as this great thing that's going to give you all these benefits. Nobody at the time was thinking about all of the cybersecurity and the downside of the bad actors. What are you seeing on the AI side from both those benefits and, hey, this is something we need to be concerned about? Chris, what do you have?
Yeah, I'd like to lead off with yeah. I think we put on our last conference. We put on a workshop. We put on a we called it Everyday AI. How do you incorporate AI technologies into your everyday life, whether it's at business or whether it's at home? But one of the caveats or one of the disclaimers that I kept reiterating, and I reiterated it because every lawyer that I talked to in regards to our AI policies at our organization was kind of just, again, it's an unproven technology at this point. We're still calling it beta, and we have to accept it as beta because it's not 100%. You can't have 100% confidence that the output is what it's supposed to be or what it should be. So we had a good conversation at our last conference on the topic. Someone asked me that question, or asked that broad question: is AI being utilized in mainstream water treatment processes? And the answer from the handful of folks that we had represented there were one of them which is one of the largest OT providers in the on the globe, I guess. And the answer was no, because number one, there's a tremendous amount of cost, upfront costs, because you have to train a model, and training a model takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of resources, and you have to train it to do what you want it to do. There's not a pre-built model that in relation
Just
to
let it
this
go.
particular chemical, this does this. And at the end of the day, we're a regulated entity. We can't, there's no oops moments for us. You can have a factory that's making a chemical for whatever purpose, that maybe it's a pool agent to put in a swimming pool every once a month. Um, but there's no oops get out of jail free button in our space. We can't have an AI driven assembly make a mistake and then we deliver it to a customer and someone accidentally dies. That's not possible. So with that, we have to take that with a kind of grain of salt that there is an emerging technology. It's going to probably prove itself in the future, and it will probably be part of our business. But right now, it's still in beta and not not 100% proven technology.
Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I agree with Chris said, but there are a lot of utilities using AI for various data aggregation and kind of managing otherwise disparate information in a more effective way, I think. But I come back to something really simple. Two things. One is what is your governance policy for your computer systems for bring your own device policy, right? Right. If you don't have one of those, and let's extend that to AI, and then Jim goes and puts the distribution map in ChatGPT, right? I can't bring that, I can't pull that back, right? So, and I can't really, say anything to Jim per se or reprimand him because there's no policy that says I can't be doing that, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to have some risk management here in terms of use of what's acceptable and what's not, right? Because you put in sensitive operational information about the utility out into these systems, right? You're introducing potential risk, right? The third piece is as we become more automated, whether it's AI or what other function, right? You're introducing more third-party risk, right? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's another vector that needs to be managed, and you got to have policies in terms of use, right? And when something as simple as cloud storage comes into play, right? You really got to look at that service level agreement. What is the amount of uptime? How important is availability to you, right? Because if it says it's 99% available, well, 99% of the year, 99% of each day, really different. And we're talking, minutes versus days in differences. And so if having, multiple days be out is not acceptable, well, then you need to adjust that policy to be 99% of every day. Right. So, I mean, there's all these little things that lawyerly things, right, Chris, that devil's in the details from a
Yeah.
contract perspective, but
Yeah.
they really go to managing the risk of the cool gee whiz thing that everybody's pitching, right? Because we always talk about the butterfly, the butterfly effect. It's like, oh, look at this, look at that. And it's like, what about this, right? And so, we've had a couple of pretty good sessions, and I'm hoping to see a few more at some of our conferences, including ACE next year, where we're having the manufacturing community talk about how they're doing. I think the assisted term is secure by design, but how are they managing cyber risks to their clients, right? Not that it's a shared responsibility, right? It's not all on the utility, but we need the technology providers to mitigate some of the risk too, because I can do certain things on my car, but I'm not the guy that wants to change the brakes, right? But how do I know that the brake pads are good from Toyota or Honda, right? Like, there's a certain amount of this is over on your side of the wire versus my side of the wire that we need some support on. So doing it together keeps things down. So yeah, there's a lot to be done on AI.
There's a very unsexy part of that needs to be done before we move, before we start making kind of macro jumps and finding all these amazing potential efficiencies with utilizing a robot to help us do our work. There's this thing called the data governance, and it's not a fun topic. It's not a fun topic at all.
That's what I that was not coming off my tongue.
Yeah, it's not fun at all. It's no one likes data governance. And if we had we're in a predicament now with cybersecurity within our industry. And we're in this predicament because we didn't slow down and look at data governance before we started plugging our SCADA systems into the internet. We didn't do that. And now our next big thing is AI. And be darned if we don't want to jump on board and do all this cool stuff with AI, but still not really dig into data governance. So
Do you think some of that is looking at it, you're not looking, or the tendency is, wow, look at this shiny thing and how great it's going to be, and some of the very good things that it can do, but not taking the time on the other side to go, okay, now how can this hurt me?
yeah, it's part of kind of understanding the kind of the bigger picture of what the outcomes are. Because the challenge too is back to what we know, what we know. We don't know. Sometimes we know what we don't know, and then sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So, and I think that's where we're at in regards to AI technology. It's happening so fast, and a lot of us don't have a lot of us don't have our heads wrapped around where exactly it's going to end up. And everyone's piloting this or piloting that. I've heard some really cool stories about some water organizations in on the East Coast as well as overseas doing some really cool stuff with piloting some AI technologies in our industry.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's that I think a lot of it for us jumping into data governance, we don't have all the answers. Even if we sit down and script it out what we think are the dangers, we don't know potentially what we don't know.
Yeah, well, we're already kind of over our time, and we probably could go another half hour just on that subject. So maybe we'll have to come back and visit that another time to
Yeah.
get a little bit more in
Yeah.
depth on AI in the water sector. And again, some of the security components around that, and the term data governance. Let me expand on that a little bit when we get into
Everybody
that.
fall asleep with that
Yeah.
one.
No, hey, guys, I really appreciate your time. Kevin, you're always a wealth of knowledge, and you're one of my go-to people at the national level. If I have a question, you're it. And Chris, just the work that you've done just at not only the local level, but with you at the helm of the new technology committee and the last 2 years of classes and exercises. it's just been a huge compliment to the, what we can do in the water sector to make water utilities better. So
Mhm.
really hats off to you and appreciate both your time today.
Of course, appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah. I
Appreciate
also
it.
wanted to thank both of you guys, Chris and Kevin. We'd like to have you on again, maybe in 6 months, maybe as an update. I think you guys have a wealth of information that can benefit our listeners. So thank you for that.
Sounds good.
You bet.